What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review the third album by rock band Good Charlotte. Basically, this project is called The Chronicles of Life and Death, and it came out in the fall of 2004. Now, this is the follow-up to their hit 2002 album, The Young and the Hopeless, which I reviewed back in 2022. So it's been a while since I covered them. I wanted to get back to Good Charlotte just because I kind of wondered what happened with them. I wonder what kind of happened with them after that particular album. They had a number of hit singles off of that album. They had songs like Lifestyles, The Rich and the Famous, Girls and Boys, and there was like another one, The Anthem, some of those type ones. They were a big deal. They were a big deal on MTV and VH1, those type places throughout 2002 and 2003. But I kind of wonder what happened with them after that particular album. It was a smash hit, but from what I gathered of this particular album, this is a pretty hit album. It's just a lot more mellow and kind of refined, I would have to suppose. They kind of leveled out a little bit and are not quite as crazy and quite as like overall rambunctious this time, which is an interesting concept just because this album is only like a little over 2 years. Just because this album was really only a little over 2 years after the previous one, I'd have to suppose. That's kind of the concept about it. This is still a pretty good relative pitch. It does have a couple of commercial songs on here, but for the most part, it's just a lot more laid back. It's also kind of a darker album, like a lot of pitches. It's also kind of a lot more of like a darker and more mature album as far as that kind of pitch kind of happens with it. I'd have to suppose. The thing about this in particular is just the fact that they have the singles on here, but they're just kind of more off to the wayside. And it's just a roundabout kind of album. I noticed about this particular album is it just has a roundabout way of going with some of these particular ones where it gets there, but it kind of takes like a more kind of curve type aspect as far as doing it. Just they're not quite the singles are just not quite as immediate this time. The singles are not quite as immediate this time, and on top of that, the album cuts are not really as immediate this time either. It's just not really full blown. This is not as much of like frat music this time and more house party type music. I mean, it does have some of that on here, but it's just in a lot more moodiness. I feel like the moodiness of this album has been upped a little bit just within the pitch, where they're not quite as rambunctious this time, but also the concept that you get like a heavier tilt of moodiness and emo-ness this time. Is just kind of the aspect of some of these just the single format. They don't really have like the Green Day and kind of like they don't really have the Green Day and My Chemical Romance and Panic at the Disco kind of singles format really mastered in terms of that emo kind of pitch. So it kind of felt like they were starting to phase out, but in small senses, it kind of felt like they were starting to phase out by this particular point. But I still think this is a solid enough album, I'd have to suppose. Definitely not one to ignore, I'd have to suppose. Pretty good highlight out of the early 2000s in terms of punk music and emo. In terms of punk music and emo music and that type of stuff, I'd have to suppose. It's just not quite as like catching as like their 2002 album, The Young and the Hopeless. But it's just the concept. It is good. I'd say it's in the same par about it. It's just not quite as immediate, I'd have to suppose. That's kind of the concept of how that kind of pitch happens. But yeah, there were four singles off this particular album, and most of these kind of have like a similar pitch to like the Young and the Hopeless album from 2002. I mean, they, like I said, the energy on this particular stuff is not quite as boisterous, not quite as real ready to go, like stuff that you would have heard all over MTV and VH1, some of those type places. But I would have to say it's some good stuff here. I recommend at least 3 out of 4 of the singles. And I think that's how it happened back in 2022. I want to say I didn't recommend Hold On. I remember that was like a single. That was the fourth single off this particular album. There's a fourth single that's very similar to Hold On called We Believe that I don't recommend. But yeah, we'll go ahead and talk about We'll go ahead and talk about the singles here. So the first single is Predictable. This is a pretty good highlight, I'd have to say. This is like a bustling kind of pop punk cut. I would definitely feel like it's just a soggy kind of day malaise of a song, I'd have to suppose. And this is just a late summer kind of out and about kind of heartache of a song, I would definitely feel like. But this is just a pretty mellow single, I'd have to suppose. So it's a good concept. Really kind of feels like a bustling type one. This is just kind of like for steadfast kind of car commerce, just getting to work, some of those type pitches, getting to class, some of those type pitches, just the bustle, just the kind of standard kind of steadfast type stuff. Pretty much like a more kind of refined version of like the anthem, I'd have to suppose, where the anthem was kind of just more, where I feel like the anthem was just kind of more of a romp type song and like a kickback, just being at class or on campus or some of those type pitches. Just kind of being at class or on campus, some of those type pitches, just some stomping grounds as far as that pitch kind of happens. But this one kind of feels like a little bit more of like a steadfast kind of responsibility type song, just within the aspect of just kind of having things more laced, not quite as recreational, not quite as like just like not quite as like slacker like, I'd have to suppose. This one just has a little bit more like, at least in terms of instrumentation, that's what I gathered from it. I mean, this is kind of like a romantic type song, this kind of relationship type fare, but I would have to say this song is kind of romantic type fare, but I would have to say it just reminds me of a little bit more laced together type pitch. It's just not quite as like loosened up this particular time. The singles on here just don't, I mean, they do have some of that in some pitches, but this is just one that's just a little bit more laced. It's kind of more like a commerce type feel, I'd have to suppose. So they kind of suited up a little bit, or just got a little bit more, refined. The second single is I Just Want to Live, and this is a pretty good highlight. This definitely reminds me of My Chemical Romance and Green Day and Panic at the Disco, some of those type emo bands that were popular in like the mid 2000s. I'd have to suppose if they would have had more songs like this, I definitely think this would have been another good highlight that would have probably gotten the multi-platinum like the old days from 2002 as far as that pitch kind of happens. This is probably the best song on the album, I'd have to say. Definitely a good highlight, very hooky, very catchy just within that pitch. This is just kind of a bopish dance groove, I'd have to say. It's just a punkish kind of house party drive that this song particularly kind of has. And this song kind of has like a roundabout chorus, but it's very jazzy and electric. This song has a roundabout chorus, but this song is very jazzy and electric, I'd have to suppose. So this is a pretty highlighted one. Once again, this is probably the best song on the particular album, I'd have to suppose. Has the most plays in terms of Spotify. This has over 100 million plays on Spotify, so it's a pretty good pitch to kind of get that one. It's up there with their 2002 album kind of days as far as that kind of particular stuff kind of happens. This was like a top 40, top 50 single in like the Billboard 100. So this is a crossover song, one of the few crossover songs. Predictable almost reached crossover. That was in like the top 115 or so of the Billboard 100, I'd have to suppose, but didn't quite reach just like the commercial marketing. This one's definitely like a pop rock kind of smash. This is definitely a song that Good Charlotte needed way more of, I'd have to suppose. Pretty much pretty infectious hook, despite the fact that it's kind of roundabout. I like the fact that it is roundabout though, so I'm not complaining about that. I would have to say it's just kind of the way that they did it was just kind of, it was just unexpected as the way that they nailed this particular song. It's just a good pitch to kind of get that one. And the third single is the Chronicles of Life and Death, which is basically the title track, I'd have to suppose. This is a pretty nice one. This is like a steady kind of day commerce of a song, I'd have to suppose. This is like shopping and mall music, definitely. And it's just, they're more comfy on this song than they were in 2002. So I just feel like the lyrics and just the melodies are a little bit more comfy, a little bit more laid back, a little bit more refined and cultivated as far as that pitch kind of happens. Just not quite as rambunctious, not quite as just like not quite as just like jostling and stuff like that. I'd have to suppose just kind of a good concept to get this particular one. It's just kind of, I mean, I do feel like this is some pretty good, steady shopping type music. I definitely like the concept of this just being like day pitch. This is just kind of one for like an in between. I kind of feel like this third single is just interesting just because of the concept. I feel like this song is interesting just because this was the song that replaced Girls and Boys. It's like the third single from like this particular album compared to their 2002 album. It's just an interesting kind of pitch to get this particular one, but it does kind of have a theme, just the standard emo type pitch as far as that kind of goes with this. Just a good concept to kind of have that, but I look after it. This is some pretty steadfast like day commerce. I just would have to suppose. Just a real good concept to kind of get. Almost kind of summer music, but once again, this is not like quite as rompish. I feel like just like predictable. I feel like Chronicles of Life and Death is not quite as rompish, not quite as much of this antics, summer antics, stuff like that. Just kind of more in like buildings and just a little bit more kind of spending money, stuff like that. Not quite as just like smoking in your backyard, stuff like that. Just kind of the bustling of like beer sipping tunes and stuff like that. It's just a little bit more kind of traverse and things of that particular commerce and things of that sort of pitch. It's just kind of, they didn't really have as much time to dick around this time as far as that pitch kind of happens with. It's just kind of the concept I suppose. But the fourth single is We Believe. This is a song I don't recommend on here, but just to talk about this one, this is very similar to like the song Hold On off their 2002 album, I'd have to suppose. It's not quite as catchy. It's kind of had the same concept, same sort of pitch, same song with the message, just within that aspect. It's just kind of one that was just trying to be a little bit more uplifting, kind of a one. But I kind of felt like it was just, it's not so much like a preachy song, but it's just kind of one that just kind of had like almost like on a soapbox, something like that. I feel like We Believe was just kind of a song that was kind of on a soapbox, something like that. Just kind of a little bit more of just like trying to get a point across as far as that pitch kind of happens. I mean, it's a good concept to kind of get it, but it just was not that melodic and overall catchy. I just feel like the instrumentation of this particular song was just not quite as pitch and just overall as affable as it probably needed to. It's the same problem I had with Hold On, where it's like I feel like the concept of these songs with the message are good, but it's just kind of the concept that they're just not that compelling to listen with production fare. These are just kind of more just kind of like they just kind of had like optimistic type productions where they just lose some of the moody pitches that they're known for and the overall rambunctiousness that they kind of have on most of their singles. Otherwise, it's just kind of the concept they're just not quite as compelling with both these four singles on their 2002 and 2004 albums. But I still feel like, I mean, it's a decent job. For the most part, this was a fairly popular song on Spotify and stuff like that. It did its job as far as what needs to happen with it, but I just, you know, it's just not one I would be as quite as compelled to fuck with as much, I'd have to suppose. So that's kind of the concept. So yeah, there's 13 songs in this particular album. So there's 15 songs on this album just within that pitch, and there's actually two versions of this album. There's a live version and a death version. I'm just reviewing the regular version. I mean, I could review either version, but I think later on I'm going to do like a bonus review as far as that pitch kind of happens and just review the albums with both these extra songs, so I just wasn't in the mood to review them at this particular point. But there's like two songs. There's one extra song on the live version, one extra song on the death version as far as that pitch kind of happens. So I'm just reviewing the 14 song version of the album, which minus the intro, there's really only 13 songs. So out of those 13, I wound up recommending to you 8. So we'll go ahead and recommend those. The 8 songs I recommend would be Predictable, I Just Want to Live, The Chronicles of Life and Death, the title track, Walk Away, Maybe, Ghost of You, Secrets, The Truth, and It Wasn't Enough. So these are some good highlighted ones. A particular kind of surprise hit that's one of my more favorite songs on this particular album would happen to be The Truth. This is like a dark, grim, kind of sobering ballad of a song, I would have to say. This is like a homely song for like depressive kind of ruminating, I would feel like, and it's just a great album. And this song is just some great album cut variety, I would feel like. So this one has a pretty morose kind of piano beat, I would definitely feel like. Just a real dark. So this one has a pretty morose kind of piano beat on here. This is just a real dark kind of malaise type tune as far as that pitch kind of has with it. Just a real nice highlighted one to kind of get. This is a pretty overall compelling one. This is just a pretty melodic one, just an overall kind of sobering type song that just has a lot of good pitches for nailing a ballad. This is a good example of how to nail a ballad just when the tempo is slowed down. This could have been like an up tempo kind of ballad and had a little bit more pep and things like that, and just kind of a been like a little bit more like a preachy type one or something like that. But this is just a good example of one that just had the perfect kind of amount of moodiness, and this is just a perfect little emo song that kind of has like a great pitch to just kind of have for like just some contemplation and things like that. I suppose that's a pretty good highlight. There is some kind of ghostliness and ghoulishness on this particular album. There's a number of songs I feel like The Truth is like that, and another highlight like that is Ghost of You. This is definitely kind of a ghoulish. This is a ghoulish kind of night venue pep and haze, I would definitely say. This is just a solemn outing, Pharaoh would definitely feel like, and it's just a contagious kind of moody vibe that this song particularly kind of has, and it just has a roundabout kind of pitch about it. So this one is just kind of one that's kind of interesting because this is kind of for a night venue. This one's not as much at the house or in the car. This one's not as much at the house or in car travel or something like that. This is kind of one that's just kind of a ghoulish type song that just works for like a night venue or a place like a pub, something like that, a bar, something that sort of pitch just to kind of have where there'd be live music, something like that, just within that particular kind of pitch. Just a real nice highlighted one to kind of get. Really like the kind of night venue type of appeal of this particular one. They needed more songs like this. I think that they probably could have stood to have had a single that could have been like this because I feel like the I Just Want to Live song is a perfect little highlight for a single as far as that pitch can have, and definitely popular single. It's one of the few singles that's kind of oriented towards house parties as far as that pitch can have. It's kind of similar to like Fall Out Boy's Dance Dance, which is a pretty good highlight around the mid 2000s also. But Ghost of You is like a good night venue type creeper that works pretty damn well, I'd have to suppose. That's a pretty good highlight. Definitely need to be a single like that. Walk Away is a pretty good highlight. This is another nice one. This is kind of a hazy, kind of the Killers like late day traverse of a feel, I'd have to say. This is like a good bustle and kind of moody pitch that this song particularly kind of has. And this is just some nice, and this song is just some nice outing commotion, I would definitely say. So the concept of it, yeah, Walk Away is just typical kind of hazy car traverse as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. Just a nice emo type one to kind of have for just being out and about, just with car traverse and things like that. Just the standard kind of bustle, just night, just the standard bustle of like evening commerce and things like that. Just the concept of just not quite at work or just got done with work, but just kind of the pitch of maybe you're going to step out, kind of like a prelude to like Ghost of You, something like that, where you'd listen to these two kind of songs, or you'd listen to these two kind of songs in conjunction as far as that pitch kind of happens. Just good for like a pretty standard kind of uppity type night to kind of have for some out and about it, I suppose. So that's a pretty nice one. And then Secrets is a pretty good highlighted one. This is definitely kind of a spooky, kind of hazy, up-tempo, kind of paced tune, I would feel like. This is just a punk kind of power ballad with like some autumn sheen about it. And this is definitely like a late day kind of radio stretcher, I would feel like. So this is a pretty highlighted one. This one's kind of similar to Walkway, just less traverse in mind, I'd have to suppose. It's kind of a good concept to kind of get. Actually, I would say that Secrets is kind of a companion piece to Walkway. I would kind of feel like this is kind of almost like a Traverse type tune, just a little bit more snappy, I would have to suppose. It's kind of one for getting ready to step out and getting ready to have a time. This is another one that kind of works in like a hazy kind of sense. This is kind of like definitely like a punk kind of power ballad, I would have to suppose, but just the concept of it is this one definitely has, this one in regards to the production definitely has some activities in mind as far as that kind of pitch kind of happens with it. I would definitely kind of suppose this is just a real nice autumn sheen kind of one, something to hear in like late September, early October, something like that as far as the affability kind of goes with it. And this is just kind of like a radio stretcher, I'd have to suppose. This is kind of one that just feels like a song that you would have heard throughout your radio all throughout the autumn, something like that, all throughout the late summer, some of that sort of pitch where it just is in your tape deck and things like that, just through some good work sessions for a few 3 or 4 months, something like that, as far as that pitch kind of happens. It's a good kind of concept to get that one. This one's not quite as much of summer activities either. They don't really have as many summer activities. I mean, this one kind of has like some activities in mind, like maybe going out for a few drinks, something like that. But this one's not quite as much of like summer activities like the Anthem and Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous. They really don't have. If you're looking for more songs, I would have to say if you're looking for more songs like Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous, really the only song that's pretty similar to that would just be I Just Want to Live. There's not really too many songs like I Just Want to Live either. There's not a bunch of pitches just within that house party kind of boppers type appeal of it. They definitely need more songs like that, but it's still a pretty good bop to kind of have for just getting ready to step out a bit and have some time. It's just kind of more in the concept of less at the house party and more kind of getting towards there, going to some place where there's going to be a venue or stuff like that, I suppose. That's kind of the concept. And then It Wasn't Enough is kind of a nice one. This is kind of like a hazy, kind of romping music, I'd have to say. This is halfway upbeat and kind of a decent house party malaise, I would feel like, but it's kind of distracted, I would say. And it's just kind of an edgy kind of song. And this is just kind of an edgy kind of song, I'd have to suppose. The concept about this particular song, It Wasn't Enough, is just a pretty moody one, I would definitely have to suppose. Definitely like the concept of this particular one. This would kind of almost be like a pretty good companion piece with I Just Want to Live, but this kind of has like a distracted type feel towards it, where it's just not as full blown. It's just not as full blown amongst like the riveting times as much as some of these other ones on here, or at least as much as I Just Want to Live is, I'd have to suppose. So it's just a concept about it. They do have some pep, but it's just kind of a lot more moodiness about this particular album. They do have some of it, it's just kind of in a darker pitch and just kind of a more, they do have some good jive about this particular album, but it's just kind of in a more kind of almost distracted kind of pitch, just with like the moodiness mixed in, and then like the kind of dark type feels that just have a lot more kind of like contrast of like a feel compared to like their more upbeat kind of sound that was from their 2002 album, I'd have to suppose. So it's just kind of the concept about, so it's just kind of the concept about that particular one, but still this is a pretty solid album here, I'd have to suppose. Definitely some good pitches, just kind of the concept that it's just a different kind of batch of songs, and just the concept that they don't always retain the strengths that they had from their previous album, I'd have to suppose. But it is some new stuff that they try out, and it actually works for most of the time, I'd have to suppose. So talk about some of the songs I don't recommend on here, which would just be 5 of these. Basically, didn't really like the lyric pitch of SOS. That one was just kind of a poor one. That just kind of felt like a suicide hotline type song, something. SOS just kind of felt like a suicide hotline type song, something of that sort of pitch. I mean, that one was kind of a moody pitch that just took it too far, I'd have to suppose. Just kind of the concept about that particular one, so I didn't vibe with that one as much. Then there's some other ones. There's like a string of songs kind of in here, like The World is Black, Mountain, and We Believe. And some of these I just didn't really like the production arrangements of, as far as the instrumentation kind of went with it. Really did. I felt like The World is Black had pretty much like the worst instrumentation on the whole album, I'd have to suppose. Really didn't like the overall pitch and arrangements of that one. Mountain was kind of an upbeat type song that just didn't work for the rest of the album. I kind of feel like that one was just kind of like a peppy type one that I just didn't connect with the energy as far as that pitch can happen. I already talked about why I didn't recommend We Believe. That's just kind of a poor single. Just didn't really like the vibe of overall that. Just didn't overall like the vibe of that particular one. And then another one is just kind of In This World Murder. And then In This World Murder was another song with a message that I just didn't connect with as much. That one was just kind of a poor one that just didn't really have a lot of affability. Just didn't like the instrumentation of that particular one as far as I kind of went with it. So basically me recommending 8 songs out of 13 on this particular album. I'm gonna go ahead and give this album like a 7.5 out of 10. I feel like it's pretty solid. Just definitely just a little bit, just a few hairs above middle of the road type stuff as far as that pitch kind of happens. It's good, but not superbly kind of excellent as far as that pitch kind of happens. I feel like the singles are just kind of more roundabout. And stuff like that. I mean, they do have some good energy for the most part, just a different kind of cultivated type feel. Some of these are just a little bit more bustling and just kind of more in like a steadfast kind of atmosphere, just a little bit more embracive, less kind of rompish and kind of more summer antics, and more just kind of out in the system and things like that as far as that pitch kind of happens, out in public and things like some of those type things. It's a little bit more kind of cultivated as far as that pitch kind of happens. But I definitely think this album needed way more songs like I Just Want to Live, just another kind of pitch like that one. And it's easily this album's shining moment as far as that pitch kind of happens with it, I'd have to suppose. But they do have some other ones, like I do feel like it wasn't, like I do definitely feel like The Truth is a pretty excellent highlight, and I feel like there's another one on here, and I also feel like It Wasn't Enough is a pretty good house party highlight as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. But for the most part, it's just not quite as much of a social project, which for the most part is not as much of a full-blown social project, which leads me to the social score of this album. So I'm going to give the social score of this album like a 6 out of 10. I kind of feel like it's got some good stuff on here just within the relative pitch of how that kind of happens. There's some good songwriting just within certain concepts. There's definitely some affability about it, but it's just kind of in a differential kind of angle. They just don't have the sheer kind of full-blown energy or furor that they had in 2002. They definitely needed more songs like I Just Want to Live. Predictable is pretty good, but this is kind of a roundabout type one that just is not quite as immediate. It's just kind of a more lambent type overall pitch. It's just kind of a more lambent type overall pitch, and just was not enough of a breadwinner to really carry over like casual fans, I'd have to suppose. Just kind of felt like a good but not excellent kind of song just within that pitch. It's a great song. It was just kind of the one that's just not as immediate and quite as much of like a home run type pitch as far as that kind of happens with it. And just I'd say the other 2 singles just didn't really deliver as much. It just kind of felt like a lot more of a lazy and kind of like less of like a full-blown smash of an album compared to their 2002 one. It didn't feel like they were worn out. It just kind of felt like they just didn't quite have like the ferocity that they probably was necessary at this particular time. They should have capitalized as opposed to kind of gotten a little bit more relaxed and cultivated, I'd suppose. That's just kind of the concept, but it's still pretty solid, I'd have to suppose. Still pretty solid, I'd have to suppose. Some of the singles do definitely have some pretty wicked pitch, I'd have to say. So it's just kind of a concept to kind of get some of these roundabout type ones, or just kind of like offhanded type ones to kind of listen to if you know just a lot of punk music. And this is kind of a forgotten about and kind of seldom out nowadays, I'd have to suppose. So that's a good thing about that. In terms of the future, from what I know, Good Charlotte has not dropped an album since like 2018, which is kind of disappointing, I'd have to suppose. But I wonder what they've kind of been up to just within that pitch of what's going to happen. I'm gonna have to fuck with some more of their albums here just to kind of see what else they were up to. I think I do at least own their 2007 of. I think I do at least own their 2007 album, so I'm gonna have to check out some more of these as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. But I would have to say, as far as this kind of atmosphere kind of goes, I would say this is a pretty solid album. Definitely a roundabout kind of album and an offhanded kind of one, but still has some quality stuff on here. Maybe not as furious as their 2002 album, but definitely not one to ignore, I'd have to say.